Not again.
What is up, people of YouTube? Welcome to yet another episode of Blender SideQuest. In today's episode, we're going to make some bouncy, comfy pillow animations. But before we get started, I want to thank my patrons for supporting this channel for the past couple weeks. I really appreciate your help. Thank you very much. I'm going to show you two ways of making this animation. The first one is the right way, the way you'd pretty much do it in any other software, more or less. The second one is the Blender way of doing things, or hacky way of doing things, because we all know the physics engine or the cloth engine in Blender is nowhere near perfect, or good for that matter, but we adapt. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Okay, so here we are in a fresh new scene of Blender. First of all, let's delete everything. The next thing that I need is to make a pillow. For that, I'm going to create a new plane. Now by default, Blender gives us this plane of 2 meters by 2 meters in dimension. And you'd be very tempted to reduce this down to actual pillow size, which is 50 by 50 centimeters. But the physics engine in Blender does not work so good at that scale. So we're going to keep the scale at 2 meters and we're going to reduce the size after we are done with the animations. So I'm going to press Ctrl 5 and give this a subdivision modifier. Set it to simple and apply the modifier. I'm going to head on over to the edit mode. I'm going to select all the faces. I'm going to press E and extrude it upwards just a little bit. I'm going to press Ctrl R to make a loop cut and I'm going to scale it just a little bit, and that's the base of our pillow. Next thing that we need is a ground for a pillar to interact with. So I'm going to create a new plane and scale it up. Let's set it to matcap and random. Now I'm going to select my ground plane and give it a collision tag. I'm going to select my pillow and give it a cloth tag, and in the cloth settings way below we see this option called pressure. I'm going to check it and change the pressure to about 4. If I head on over to the first frame and play the animation, there we go. That's a bouncy pillow. Now if you want variations in your bouncing animation, you can play with the pressure settings or the custom volume settings. All of these settings will give you a different variation of bounce every single time. We're not happy with single pillow, we need more. So I'm going to go back into my modifiers tag. I'm going to disable the cloth tag and I'm going to add an array modifier. I'll add it before the cloth tag and increase the count to 3 and the factor by 1.1. Now if I enable the cloth tag and play it again, we see all our pillows bounce up at the same time. But we don't want that. We want them to gradually bounce up one by one by one. For that, we're going to use vertex maps or weight paints. And to do that, we're going to need dynamic paint. The first thing that I'm going to do is delete the cloth tag, because right now we don't need it. I'm going to create a new cube. Let's head on over to the Z-axis and scale it so it fits our pillow perfectly. Bring up my timeline and move 10 frames ahead and create a location keyframe. Move a couple frames ahead again, move it in the x-axis to the next pillow and create another location keyframe. Move ahead a couple keyframes, move it to the next pillow and create a location keyframe. Right now our animation of our cube is moving from first pillow to the third one, but we also don't need the first pillow to be activated instantly. I'm going to create another keyframe at the beginning of our animation and move our cube somewhere where it touches neither of the pillows. Let's press I and create a location keyframe. This is how our cube looks right now. Now I'm going to select my cube, go into the physics properties and add dynamic paint. We don't need it as a canvas, we need it as a brush. So I'm going to add a brush tag. In my pillows, I'm going to add dynamic paint again and I'm going to add canvas. I don't need so many frames. I'm going to change it to, what was the last, I'm guessing 40. So I'm going to keep it to 50. Let's increase the substeps a little bit. Let's go surface type to weights and output enabled DP weight. And we need to cache it, and for caching it we need to save it. Let's save it. And now we bake the animation. Now let's head on over to weight paint mode and let's disable the cube. And if we play our animation, we see the vertices being activated with dynamic paint. Right now the problem is that the weight paint isn't activating an entire pillow all at once. It's activating it part by part. We need to change that. So let's head on over to object mode again. Let's make our cube visible, and in our dynamic paint settings, let's delete the bake. Let's select my cube and select all the keyframes, press T and set the interpolation to constant. Now my cube travels instantly. Now if we head on over to the weight paint mode, we hide our cube and we view our animation. There we go. Entire pillows getting activated all at once. Now if we go into our physics properties, add a cloth tag, go down to the pressure properties, enable pressure, change the pressure to 3 and vertex groups to dp weight. That is the vertex map we just created using dynamic paint. Now we don't need a simulation that big. I'm going to change it to 50 frames just to check how this looks right now, and I'm going to bake it. And if we play it, let's head on over to weight paint mode, and we'll see as the vertex gets activated, our pillows starts bouncing. Now using this method, you can create complex setups with complex arrays and complex dynamic paint setups, which will give you different results every single time. The only limit is your imagination, but also Blender's cloth engine, because if I create a grid of 20 by 20 pillows, it gets very laggy. Most of the times it doesn't even work. So let's move on to the second way, which is the hacky way. For the hacky way, I'm going to use a single pillow without any array modifier, and I'm going to use a ground plane, obviously, with a collision tag. Let's give it a cloth simulation, and there we have a pillow. We don't need a simulation for 250 frames. Let's give it 100 frames. That's going to be enough. Let's bake the animation. After you have it baked, you're going to file, export, and you're going to export it as an Alembic file. And let's call it TTABC. Doesn't even matter. And I don't need 250 frames. I need only 100 frames. Let's export the Alembic. Now we don't need them anymore. Let's import the Alembic that we just created. Let's delete the ground plane because we don't need it. Because when we play this, we see this animation of a simulation, which is not actually a simulation. This is an exported Alembic file. So when I go to the modifiers tab and I see this mesh sequence cache, this is actually the cache of 100 frames of the Alembic file that we just exported. If I go into the time property and I create a frame offset of like say 10 frames, now our animation will start at the 10th frame. If I move it ahead to like 20 frames, now our animation will start at the 20th frame. You see where I'm going with this? You could create multiple copies and offset their animation time by whatever you want. I'm going to create a couple copies and I'm going to change their frame offset by 3 different values. Okay, so here we have the same Alembic file with the frame offset set to 10, 20 and 30. So it looks like 3 different pillows popping. Okay, so now what we can do is go into geometry nodes, create a new plane, create a new geometry nodes tree. Let's add a grid. Let's set the size to 20 and let's set the vertices to 10. Let's add an instance on point nodes. And for instance, I'm going to use a collection info node. I'm going to select all these Alembics that we just made. I'm going to press M and create a new collection, call it collection 2, and let's hide this collection. In my collection info node, I'm going to select collection 2, and there we are, all our Alembics in their position. But right now, all of them are overlapping. Let's check separate children. Let's check pick instance. If you want to randomize it, you can select random value from 1 to 3 because there are 3 Alembics, so 3 makes sense. And if I press play, there we go. You can have more by creating more simulations, more alembics, offsetting multiple animations, which is how I made this particular setup. Rather than using all of these alembics in one geometry node, you can create a single array with one alembic. You can offset it by 10 frames and that create a second alembic, and then you can create the series of bouncing pillows, and that could be unlimited. You can convert it into loops. Like I said, the applications are endless. It just depends on your imagination and your system as well if you're doing the first method. So that's it for this episode, guys. Be sure to check out my Patreon page. Thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.